Just for the completeness of my recording, I'll start again and say hello to everyone. As today, I welcome you to our session, community edition session on Uipath Action Center and Uipath Apps. Our host today will be me, Tomasz, and Joveria, our Uipath MVP. And going back to our original topic, I want to make a couple of I will set the background or set the stage for Joveria's presentation that will follow. As you probably know, Uipath platform comes together with two types of automation robots. One of them is attended robot and another one is unattended robot. Major difference between those two robots is that attended robot sits on user desktops and executes processes and automations on user workstation, while unattended robot executes on a dedicated server out of the user side. And as of these two robots have their advantages and disadvantages, we covered this in previous community event that you can find in YouTube. One of the major that we will try to address today is a difference how these robots interact with people. Of course, if we have attended robot, because it runs on the same desktop user is working on, it has a direct line to the user. At any point of time, attended robot can display a pop-up message, a dialog box, a form to request user feedback, user review, or user assistance. When it comes to unattended robot, of course, because it runs on a server that no one really has access to, no business user has access to, unattended robot has to handle user and robot interaction in a bit different way. And when it comes to humans and robots working together, we have a number of scenarios, and all of these scenarios are implemented by our partners, by our customers, depends on the use case they are automating. So you can see we have a scenario where no robots are involved. In this case, of course, all the work is manual and users have to handle it themselves. Another type of automation is attended on demand. Attended on demand is automation executed by user, and it is running between user activities. So we'll have a user to prepare, let's say, some input data, start the robot. A robot will process the data and generate output data or output result. Eventually, user will take over again and continue with the rest of the process. Attended automation can be executed in tandem. What happens here is a robot can run and initiate processes based on variety of triggers. So as user is interacting with desktop applications, interacting with web applications, robot can monitor user activity. And let's say if user selects a button that takes him to invoice posting screen, robot can take over and fill this up immediately as user is working and let user continue. We can, of course, have a hybrid automation where attended robots and unattended robots work together. So for example, user can prepare some input data, have it initially pre-processed by attended robot, and eventually an attended robot can create queue items that will eventually be handed over or processed by unattended robots. Of course, we can have a partially unattended automation. In this particular case, human sets the stage for unattended process and maybe drops some data into a shared folder, maybe prepare some Excel files, and unattended robot, when scheduled or when initiated by orchestrator, will pick up data from that folder, pre-process data, and continue with automation. And finally, we have fully unattended, 100% unattended automation, where unattended robots initiated by orchestrator through a schedule or through an action trigger or queue item trigger executes a process. So how these scenarios affect us today? You see, in order to build attended automations and interact with users, we get all the tools the moment we install UiPath Robot and UiPath Studio. But when it comes to unattended automation, we will have to leverage additional tools, part of our UiPath Enterprise Automation Suite pillar called Engage. Today, we'll take a look at two of these tools. One is called Uipath Apps, and another one is called Action Center. Uipath Apps is our low-code, no-code application builder. In short, it allows you to build a user interface that can be very easily connected to attended or unattended process. This means we can create a compelling ways for user to interact with the robots, to provide data or receive data from the robots. On the other side, we have Action Center, which also helps us to interact with information that robots are processing. And Action Center is especially used if a participant of the process is not the initiator of the process. So for example, if we have an approver and our unattended robot is processing certain documents, it runs into a situation where approval is necessary. Unattended robot can park this approval request or approval action in UiPath Action Center and then proceed with next transaction. Meanwhile, this approval request will remain in Action Center, and when user is ready to interact with it, he will log into Action Center, review the data, maybe complete the data, and eventually either approve, reject, or provide any other action necessary. So UiPath Apps and Action Center simply help us automate very efficiently with UiPath unattended robots. Let's take a look at an example. Let's say we have a process that was delivered originally as attended process, and it's running on attended robot. This big yellow box represents user workstation, and we have attended robot running on this workstation. But at the same time, if user needs to initiate the process, he will interact with UiPath Assistant installed in this workstation as well. He will go to his system tray, initiate assistant, and then he can choose which process he wants robot to execute. Let's say now our attended robot is running, assuming there is some information that needs to be extracted, for example, from document printed externally. We can use UiPath Document Understanding Framework, and if confidence level is very low, a UiPath attended robot can immediately display a validation station on user desktop and have user review the document and review the data. Once this part is completed, transaction or process completes to transaction approval. If transaction approval is necessary, again, the robot can display an approval request, a desktop form, present all the data to the user and ask him to say whether he approves or not. Finally, robot will complete the process by posting that transaction. So as you can see, we have one user interacting with robots through UiPath Assistant, through UiPath validation station displayed on his desktop, as well as variety of pop-ups, dialog boxes, and approval forms, all on his desktop. But what if we have the same process delivered as unattended automation? We try to approach the same scenario from user's workstation point of view. We'll realize that we can't really initiate the process because this is running as unattended robot, and we may not even have any robot installed on this workstation. On the other hand, because process is running with unattended robot cannot show any forms and cannot display any desktop components on this particular workstation. And finally, approval may be centralized. So all the documents processed by unattended robots may need to be approved by many, many people. And that's why having an approval form displayed on only one workstation wouldn't be practical. So how do we address this challenge? Well, we grab Uipath Apps and we grab Uipath Action Center. So this will lead to a situation where user is still interacting with his workstation or mobile device. But instead of running a desktop applications, this users will initiate the process using a web browser, or validate extraction results using a web browser, or review and approve using web browser. This is all possible because as part of UiPath Enterprise Automation Suite, we offer our UiPath apps that allow you to build user interfaces to interact with robots very efficiently, and UiPath Action Center that allows robots and human exchange work item properly. So let's take a quick look at it. Juveria, are you with us?
Thank you, Thomas. It was really an engaging example. So for today's session, I have a very simple approach and an engaging approach, definitely. And we are going to build Uipath apps on our system. So let me share my screen. Hello, everyone, and allow me time to share my screen. Okay.
Great, it's coming up.
I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, we can see your screen, Juveria. Thank you.
Okay, so in today's demo, what I have done, I've created an application in which the user can cash in a certain amount, a description, and an email ID. And when it clicks submit, at the back end, Teller application is opened up and this amount is keyed in the Teller application with other details. And then the process is carried out in the Teller application. Once that is done, the bot grabs the transaction ID, the total amount, and a transaction status, and it displays it in this Teller application UiPath apps, and also it sends you an email confirming that your transaction has been processed. But there's a catch here, because today we are going to talk about UiPath apps and human in loop, right? So the catch over here is, if we key in an amount that's greater than 1500, basically it would not go through your Teller application, but would require an approval, say from your supervisor. And once the supervisor approves, you will get an email notification. But what happens on your Teller application UiPath apps? It gives a prompt saying that your whole transaction is pending approval and wait for the email for the confirmation. So before I show how to make this app or how to build in the UiPath Studio workflows, let's run this demo first. So I'm going to run it by using a small amount, say about 23. And let's click submit. So once you click submit, you can see that the UiPath apps actually triggered a UiPath process and is keying in the value in the Teller application. Once done, you will get a prompt saying that the transaction has been completed, and for more details, you can check your emails. Also, the transaction ID and the transaction status has been published on your Teller application UiPath apps. Let's see what happens if I key in an amount that's greater than 1500. It triggers the UiPath process. As you can see, it triggers the UiPath process, and since the amount was greater than 1500, the amount that I've set as threshold, it sends me a dialog box saying that it's pending approval, and once approved, you will receive an email. Let's go ahead and check my Action Center. What happened over there? Is there any task assigned to the supervisor? Yes. So currently, this is a very simple form in which the supervisors can see what amount was keyed in and can approve or reject. Let's go ahead and approve this. Let's assign it to myself first. Once I assign it to myself, it goes into the pending part, and let's approve and click submit. So once I click submit, a process is triggered again that would carry on the further portion that it would key in the approved amount and do all the transaction in the teller application and send you a respective email stating whether your transaction was confirmed or rejected. So this was an earlier email for the one that had amount less than 1500, and this is our current transaction details. Now let's get into building this. Let's get our hands dirty in short. So let me move to the automation cloud once again. So how do you make UiPath apps, or where do you find the studio to make your UiPath apps? So when you log into your automation cloud, on the left-hand side, there is a tab which gives you an option to log into UiPath apps. Let me re-log into my session and let's begin. So let's click on apps. So once you click on UiPath apps, this is what you basically see. This is the UiPath App Studio. In order to start a new creation process, new application creation process, all you need to do is click on create new and give a suitable name. So let me give it a name called as teller application demo. Let's click on create. Okay, before moving any further or before designing anything, let me walk you through of whatever we are seeing. So here you see, right on the right hand, you see a panel that says add new control, and it also says container and other stuff. Let's not focus on that, but let's go on and see what all controls we can add. So let's keep this pane open for now and see what all we have. Let's start with icons. So when you see icons, these are nothing but just image-based descriptive items that you can use to make your application more interactive and more visual in nature. So you have got a variety of icons that you can use in your UiPath apps. Let's talk about containers. Now there are three kinds of container: a container layout, and a page container. For what does that mean? So container layout, you can call this as a bigger part of your UiPath application, inside which you can have multiple containers to build your whole application. You can bring in controls, etc. in the container. So container layout contains multiple containers. Now what is container? Container lies inside a container layout, and you can add multiple controls like input, output, display options, icons, etc. Now, what is a page container? I will show you how to use all these containers. Now, for describing what is a page container contains a reference to a page in your application that you're building. So suppose if you have a main page, and in the main page, you want to refer to a page, a login page, you can use this page container. Now let's move to other controls. Those are called as displays. So in displays, you can have header, label, image, list, data table, etc. So what happens if you want to display maybe a data in form of a data table? You should use table control. Similarly, if you want to have a drop down in your application, what control should you use? You should use list in that case. So these are all the controls, display controls, that are readily available for your use. Now, what if you want to provide an input? So very simple, we have got inputs. We can give button as an input that will trigger an event, a rule. You can have checkbox, a date picker, and multiple things you can have from your input control. Apart from that, I'll show you what other properties does this right-hand side of the panel has, because it is amazing and the backbone of your UiPath apps. Now let's talk about the left-hand side panel, that is this. It gives you a tree structure of what actually you're going to build using UiPath App Studio. So right now, if you see, I am going to start building the main page of my application called as Teller application demo. And inside that, I have a container layout. As I mentioned, that the container layout will contain containers inside it. So you see, I have a container inside the container layout. Now, when I start building it, gradually you will see the tree structure building up over here. And it is very important to rename them properly. Why I say that, or why I call it as my best practice, a best practice that I suggest, is because suppose you're building a UiPath application that is complex in nature, and if you rename them properly or give them a proper name, it would be easy to reference to it in future. So now, what is this portion? So this is the center portion is where you start building everything, your UiPath apps and every other thing. So let's start. Okay, so I'm going to start by dragging this in the center, and I want a header for my application that will say it's a Teller application demo. So for header, in the display panel, I have header option. So let's bring it here. Now, once it's done, let me show you few properties that we can set. As said, I always recommend to rename everything properly. So my main page is actually for Teller application. And in the layout, this layout is for the main page. And I'll name my container as Teller application. Now let's go to header portion. In the header portion, you will see three properties of this header that you can edit. You can give a meaningful description. You can associate an event with it. So what does event means? We will talk about it going further. And you can set a definitive style, how you want it to be. So let's give a meaningful name to this header first. Do I want to associate any event or click rule to it? For now, I don't want it. And let's edit the style. I want it in the center of my page, and I want it to be headline 2 maybe, and change. I keep the background color same. I can change the font. I can have it anything of my choice, maybe this. And then let me get it in bold and underline format. So this is what I have. Now, if you want to have more containers in your application, what you can do is click on plus sign. So when you click on plus sign, you see in the same container layout, a container was added. Now you can drag these containers and can arrange as per the need. So let me have 2 containers at the moment for our application, and let me resize them. The reason why I have two containers at the moment is because I want to key in input in one of the container and then get the output in the other side of the container. So now let's start building in our application. Let's add new control. So in this part of the container, I want it to display all the input of the transaction. So let's get a transaction and let's start by editing it. Do I want to attach any event right now? No. So let's just start by adding simple fonts and simple styles to my header at the moment. Let's add new controls in which now in this particular page, I want the user to key in the cash in amount, to key in a description of what kind of transaction they are performing, and to key in an email ID so that final result is emailed to the user as well. So in order to do that, I'll get 3 labels and 3 text box. So let me arrange 3 labels first, and then let me go ahead and get 3 inputs or 3 text box. Okay, now you see if I do not name them and somebody else has to debug my application in future, it basically would be a very cumbersome process. So let's label them properly and name them properly. Let's go ahead and start. So I'm going to name them as cash in. And same would be the name of the label as well. So the name goes in the general tab. I will talk about value binding while we are arranging the processes. Let's just move forward and see what else we have to do. Let's give a good name for this text box as well. So cash in. Let's go to this label, and I want the user to give a description to the transaction. So that's what I do. Now, what if you want to change the background of this container? Go to styles. I'm sorry. Go to styles and choose a color of your choice. So maybe this is the color that I want to choose. So all I have to do is go to the styles part of the container and click on background color. Once I click on background color, I have to choose a background color of my choice. It can be anything. So for now, maybe I wanted blue in color. As I select blue, the color is set for this container. Now you can keep it without any colors, or it's totally on your choice. So let me keep it blue for the time being. Now, if you want to see the same color in the other container, what you can do is basically just grab these values and use the same values for this particular container. So I choose this container, I go to style, and I click on background color. And this is how you can have a background color for your container. So if you see in the application, you can modify and give aesthetic value to your application as well. Let's move forward. This container actually, the second container actually contains controls that gives me the output of the transaction that has been carried out. So let's add new controls over here. So I need a transaction ID and I need the status of my transaction. Let's rename them properly and let's add few more controls that would display what actual transaction ID was. So let's bring in text box. And let's start configuring them. So over here in this label, let me go and rename this properly. Let's align them in the center. Same for labels. Let's give a proper name. Okay, so one thing that I've missed over here is to add a button. So as the user adds in a cash-in amount, a description and email ID, he or she can click a button and that click event would actually trigger the process. Let's add a new control and let's add a button to our first pane input transaction details. So over here, let's give a proper name to the button, maybe submit. And let's give an icon. So I was talking about icon in our earlier phase of this demo. So I want to use some visual to. I want to add a visual to my button. So what I can use is these all icons that's available in the UiPath App Studio. So maybe for this particular demo, let me add this particular icon. So as soon as you drag and drop this icon, you can see that icon was visible, now is visible in my button as well. Let's talk about few more properties. So if you see, there are places where you can actually bind your values. Value binding means it attaches this whole application to the UiPath Studio workflow, which I will add to this particular application. Also, now if you see, if you have a transaction ID, you might not want the user to change that transaction ID. So what you can do is set this particular label or this text box over here as disabled. So what happens if the user gets the transaction ID, he basically can copy it but cannot make any changes to it. Similarly, let's do the same for status and set it to disabled. Now this is a preview of what kind of application I want. But before going into and adding a process to this application, let me walk you through to the flow first. So what I have prepared is a flow that's called as the app connector flow. Now let's talk about two basic things that we need to keep in mind when we are creating a flow for an application that's created on UiPath Apps. Let's go back to the studio and check. So basically what I want my user to key in the cash-in amount, and the workflow should capture this cash-in amount from here. The description and email ID should also be captured from this UiPath application. So basically these three are the inputs to my workflow. So if you create input in your application, that becomes an input argument in your workflow as well. So I have three input argument: cash-in, transaction description, and email ID. Now, the second thing is, if you want to do a particular process with the help of your workflow and give out certain result in your application, you basically would need out argument. So I have two out argument at the moment that will give the transaction ID and status and would update it back to your application over here. So let me walk you through the flow. The basic details I've already discussed, and that is very important for us to keep in mind. So it's a very simple workflow. In this workflow, I open the teller application. Once the teller application is open, I key in the cash-in value. I have certain not on us check and on us check value that's already predefined, and I get the transaction ID and I get the total amount from the teller application screen. Before doing anything, I first check if the amount that's the cash-in amount that's provided by the user is it less than 1500. If it is less than 1500, I will perform this sequence, or else what I do, I add this particular detail, that is the cash-in amount, transaction details, the email ID, in a queue that would further be used for my approval process. Now, if you see, I have divided the whole process, the human in loop process and the application workflow, in two portions. The only reason why I believe in doing so is that it makes the management of the workflow easy, and the updates and anything else is also easy. So suppose if this workflow breaks in the future, the workflow that is used for approval is still working. It's not affected by any failures in my app connector process. So I'll talk about the approval workflow later on. Right now, we have discussed that if the user adds an amount less than 1500, it will be processed, or else it will be sent for approval. Now let's see how to engage it or how to use it in the UiPath App Studio. In order to use this in the UiPath App Studio, what you have to do is click on this plus sign. Now, when you click on this plus sign, you can add pages, processes, and controls. So I want to add basically a process. Let's click on process. So what happened, if whatever orchestrator session you're connected to, it will appear over here, and you have to click on next. Now, under your folder in which you've published your processes, you will see the process that you need to connect. Currently, for me, it's in the default folder, and I want to connect my app connector process. Now, as soon as I click on the app connector process, what we need to emphasize over here is the inputs and the output. So whatever input arguments you created actually became the input for from the apps to the studio workflow, and whatever the output is coming from the workflow comes under the panel of output inside this particular studio. Now let's select. Once you select, a new on the left hand side in this tree, a new part is created called as process. So what happens in future if you have changes in your process, all you have to do is come here, and instead of parameters there will also be a button to refresh. All you have to do is click on refresh. Now if you click on parameters, it will show you the outputs that you have and the parameters that you have. So this is how you don't need to go back to your UiPath Studio to check what is happening. You actually can view everything on the UiPath Studio itself. Now let's talk about UiPath binding, value binding. Let's come over here, and now what I want the user to key in the cash-in amount, and this amount should actually flow in my process. So we have to bind the value. So as soon as you click on the value binding, you will get the process that you've connected, and you will get the argument name that you want to connect to. So I'll get the cash-in amount, and you see a binding icon would appear as soon as this job is done. Now let's do the same for description and email ID. Once done, you see binding has appeared, binding icon has appeared for all the 3 text boxes. I also have to bind these transaction ID. So basically these are the output from my workflows. I'll bind it over here. Okay, you can also, like, there might be application where you want to give some hint text or default text. So if you want some hint or default text, you can actually configure it for your system over here. Now, what I want, as soon as the user clicks on submit, I want the process to start. So on the button submit, let's go to the events panel. On the events panel, you actually have a place to create the rule. So let's go and click on create rule. So what happens, I want, as soon as the user clicks on submit, I want a process to start. So you can actually select there are multiple options. You can actually select start process and then bind which process you want to start. Once you've done that, you can choose what kind of automation you're having. Currently, we are having unattended automation. Let's go ahead and select that. Now, if you leave this, the process will work fine, but let's add some aesthetic value. So when the process starts, I want a buffering kind of icon to appear over my application. So use this particular option called as show or hide spinner, and let's give a message over here. Now, what I want, when this process is completed, I want the bot to check if it is pending approval, then show a different kind of message. But if the transaction is complete, show a different kind of message, and also hide the spinner. So let's first hide the spinner. It's very simple. To show, keep this as true, and to make this, to disappear the spinner from the application, just uncheck this. Now, you can also use multiple if-else condition, and I'm going to show you how to use that. I'm going to use one if-else condition, and my condition is comparison between the argument and its value. So I'll use a compare value, and I'll use the type of my argument over here, that is string type, and the value that I'm going to compare is also string, obviously. Now let's grab what argument I'm comparing. I'm comparing status argument with what value. So the value is, for my process, I'm using if the value is pending approval. So let me grab the exact status from my workflow. And let me key it in over here. Done. So if the status is pending approval, I want the bot to show a message saying that transaction pending. Now, how to to get this, when you click, let me show it again. So if you want to show a message, you actually have an option called as show message. You have to select this show message option, and then you can give a title and a meaningful message that you want to pop up over your application screen. You can also configure the kind of the message it is. For me, if it is transaction pending, it's a warning. And if transaction is successful, it's a success message. I can also change the amount of time I want the pop-up to remain on the screen. So let me use 10 over here. Now, this is all the successful scenarios. What happens if in the background your process failed? How would the user know? Can we notify the user? Yes. So all you have to do is go in the error section and start doing or start initiating the kind of message you want to display. So what I want to display over here is currently a show message, and I want to tell the users, in case error happens in the workflow, I want to tell the users that please contact admin. And it's an error. That's it. So this is all configured at the moment. Let's click on close. Now, before I give you a demo of what we've actually created, let me walk you through the process of approval that I have created. Now, suppose if somebody keys in an amount that is greater than 1500, I want my supervisor to approve it. So I have added a queue in case the amount is greater than 1500. My first process that connects to the application, it will add it to the queue. Let me show you the queue over here. So the name of my queue is app connector queue. And what kind of trigger have I set on this? So I have set a trigger that does what? As soon as one item is added in my app connector queue, trigger the approval process. And you see the number of minimum job that is required to trigger this is 1. So this is actually triggered using queue triggers. There are 2 kinds of triggers that now is available. You can schedule and you can use queue triggers. For our job, we are using queue trigger to trigger the approval process. Now let's go on the approval process. So this is my approval process. As soon as this process is triggered, the items are captured from the queue, that is app connector queue. And I am using persistent activities and form creator activities to create my form for approval or rejection in the action center. So what happens, a form is created for the supervisor to reject or approve. Once it is approved or reject, the output in the studio or in your workflow is received in form of a JSON output. So I have used a workflow that actually grabs the information from that JSON string. So what I have done is I deserialize the JSON and I check for certain parameters. First check is after deserializing the JSON, I check if the approved is true. I go ahead and I key in the cash in amount and everything in the teller application and send a notification to the user. In case if the supervisor has rejected it, it will only send a rejection email to my user. Now let's go ahead. I have already connected this particular process. I have already connected it to the process. We already know what kind of approval process is. Before publishing, let's go and preview our application. Let's click on preview. So this is how your application will look like. Let's test it out. Let's click on submit. So the process that we actually connected to this application is triggered and the data is filled in or keyed in the teller application. The information, that's the transaction ID, and the final status is the output of the workflow that was right now triggered and is sent as an output to this particular teller application demo. So you see in the show message, I said transaction details and transaction completed. So we will reconfigure it and dismiss. So we get the transaction ID and the status is confirmed. Now let's see what happens if I key in something greater than 1500. So transaction details, it comes as transaction pending. Now let's go to our action center and see what has happened. So in the action center, you basically get 3 tabs: pending, unassigned, and completed. Any new action that is created for approval comes over here. You can assign it to yourself, comes in the unassigned portion. You can assign it to yourself or a specific user, and then let the user do the action of choice. So as soon as I assign it to myself, items from unassigned portions will move to the pending portion. Now let me approve it and let me click on submit. Once I click on submit, that particular ticket or the particular item that was created has been moved to the completed part of my action center. And let's see, when I click on submit, what happens is the assistant is triggered again. That means the process is triggered again to go in and key in the cash in amount that was approved by your supervisor and perform the rest of the steps. So the rest of the step was sending a notification to the user. So let's see what we get. So here you see I get a notification with the transaction ID, the total amount, and status confirmed. Now it's just not limited to start a process or by clicking on a button. There are many things that you can do with your apps actually. So I'll create a very small demo how and what we can do. So maybe I want a new page for my process. So all I have to do is create a new page and add new controls. So I'll add a container. Remember to name it properly. Since I'm running short of time, I'm just going to create this new page. I'm going to show you how I can refer this page in my main page. I showed you 2 things. In my main page, I showed you that I can add a control from the containers portion. I can use page container and refer that new page over here. So what I have to do is in this new page, I want to refer this page. All I can do is click on this new page, go on general, create, and add a page over here. So open a page. Which page you want to open? I want to open new page. Close. So now in this page container, you have actually referred the new page. Now over here in this new page, you can go ahead and configure any number of control that you want, similar to that of the ones that we did for the main page. Also, what you can do is when you come on the main page, you can bring a button right now over here. The rule is to click and trigger a process. You can also configure the rule rather than starting a process, it can start or go to a new page over here. So let me disable it or let me delete it for now. We can go here and open a page. Click on open page and drag this new page. So what happens now, when the user clicks on submit, the trigger goes to this new page rather than triggering the new process that we attached. Also, you can change the entry point of these pages. Right now, main page is the entry page. You can move it down or you can change, rename, duplicate the same page, multiple things. You can click on the new page and click this as start page. Now the entry point is changed. So basically in the tree also you see the hierarchy was changed, and now when you preview this application, new page will come as your first page. Let's preview this. So basically, you see, when I load my new pages since the first part, I will not see anything because I've not added any control in my new page at the moment. I see a blank page. Now let's go back to our Teller application. To publish this application, all you have to do is click on publish and you publish this application. It is very simple. It's click of a process and you can publish it. So now your app is published. Now, what happens if you, let's go back to our App Studio main page. And what happens, I have published this particular Teller application demo, but it's only me who is using and editing it at the moment. But I want other user to use it as well. So how to do that? Basically, I've changed this Teller application demo. Let me show you in KL chapter session. Click on these three dots and click on share. Once you click on share, you can actually edit the permissions. You can add the user, you can add the whole organization to run this application. To add the user, just click on add and search the user that is available. And since this user is already added over here, all you have to do is click on add user and search the username and click on add. And let me do it first. Let me delete this. Now let me add the user. And you can assign various roles. I want the user only to run this process and not to edit this process. So I'll just assign it the permission as user and I'll click on add. Now what happens, a person with this email ID can actually use my app called as KL Chapter Session 1. So that was all the demo from my side. I would like to stop the share for now and I open up the floor for questions, suggestions, and any ideas that you have that you want to explore using Uipath Apps and Human in Loop and would need my help. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Juvaria, there are two questions. First one is, can we send the approval in email?
Oh yes, you can send the approval in email. Currently, I'm only using Human in Loop Action Center, but you can also configure an email ID for the same.
Okay, there is an, hopefully this answers the question. And the another question, can we add validation to ensure all values are being filled by the user?
Oh yes, you can configure it either by creating again a Human in Loop action form that would then need a certain kind of approval from your user, or you can set in default values for the user, or you can key in your own workflow, you can key in certain values. So if that values does not match with the corresponding input, you might actually reject the whole transaction.
Noted. So this is the set of questions we've had from the chat panel, but now it's all up to our audience to unmute themselves and ask questions straight away. Okay, there is an update to a question about sending approval in the email. So I wanted to okay, what the person asking the question, Hamayun Kabir, I'm sorry if I'm butchering this name, my apologies. Do the approver will get approve or rejection option in the email?
Yes, you can actually configure your email in a way that you can approve or reject your actions, the actions inside your email itself. I hope it answers.
I also, I hope so. Great. Okay. So I guess we have no further questions. Of course, I think that whoever is still with us, feel free to unmute yourself and keep asking. But Juvaria, if you don't mind, let me quickly summarize this and we'll wrap it up.
Definitely. Definitely.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your presentation. It was a perfect amount of time and in terms of length. And I guess if you'd like to learn more for everyone, we encourage you to take a look at our Uipath Academy. We encourage you to take a quick look at Uipath Insider portal as well. But if you're with us, let me quickly share my screen, and I have one more slide to cover, and we'll wrap it up. Okay. So everything that I spoke about and Juveria explained is simply to make your automations more reliable, easier to access, and simply more functional, especially if you're operating in the big organizations. And if we take a look at Uipath Action Center and Uipath Apps, Uipath Action Center is available at this moment both on-premise and on the cloud. But Uipath, as of now, is available only in Uipath Automation Cloud. We, of course, have a plan to have Uipaths available, Uipath apps available as part of our on-premise offering, but this is something that will come a little later this year. So we try to summarize the benefits we get from these approaches. First of all, we get a better license utilization. Think about it. Instead of deploying multiple unattended robots to different people running one or two processes, now we can actually have one unattended robot that will run multiple different processes, regardless of user that needs to initiate the process. And this robot can run, of course, 24/7. Of course, we get a lot of convenience here because users can trigger automations on unattended robots directly from their web browsers and their mobile device. So think about it. If you want to apply for annual leave, you simply pop up your browser and access the dedicated Uipath app meant for it. Implementation is quite straightforward. Juveria has showed you that this low-code, no-code approach make building of user interfaces very easy. We can, of course, create a way more comprehensive, way bigger interfaces with a lot more functionality. But again, this is something that we'll let you try on your own. Of course, this way, by using Uipath Action Center and Uipath Apps, we can make automation available to everyone and have our employees, have people working for our company adopt automation or benefit from automation much faster. Transparency is also there because all the user actions are traceable. We can see how many actions are left for user to process, how many actions he has processed, what's the timeline and SLA, and whether he stayed within SLA. Of course, using unattended automation gives us an option to allocate resources in a dynamic way, right? Imagine if we have 5 attended robots and they run out of processing time, it's a little tough to add another attended robot. But with unattended robots, we can very easily just spawn another robot during peaks and scale our computing capabilities. Processing with attended robots, Action Center and apps of documents and transactions can be very nicely centralized. This means all the documents will be available on the servers, in repositories. None of these documents have to be stored and processed locally on user workstation. Robots, unattended robots especially, will run 24/7, 365 days operations. And this means we can initiate robot or interact with, we can initiate robot through Uipath apps or interact with actions through Action Center anytime possible. Security in this approach is greater because through Uipath apps and Uipath Action Center, we only expose minimum amount of information that's necessary for user to see in order to, let's say, approve or review. This significantly reduces potential for any fraud or sensitive information leak. And finally, because all of this is happening within Uipath platform, we have a very easy way to create dynamic dashboards presenting user activity, SLA, and let's say quickly identify our bottlenecks if they arise. So all these benefits come straight out of the box, and it's up for you to start using Uipath apps, start using Uipath Action Center, and build more efficient automations. Thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate everyone's time. I will post a recording of this event to YouTube, and I will share slides with you. You will receive a wrap-up email, but I guess we have another question coming, right? So I heard.
Yes, we do have a question from Mohit. So he asks that, can we upload an Excel in Uipath app so that multiple transactions can be processed? Your transaction is processed by the Uipath workflow. So you definitely can use Excel to upload those items to be processed by that workflow. Now, if you want to display the data table or the Excel, you can actually use Uipath apps to do that. So in the display panel, there is something called as, in the controls panel, there is something called as table control. You can use that table control and link it to the data table or the Excel that you read using your UiPath workflow. And this will create a visualization interface for yourself.
So I'll add a little bit on top of that. In short, using Uipath Apps, we have a control that allows you to upload any document and pass it to a robot, whether it's a PDF, Excel sheet, or anything else that robot can interact with. It's possible to feed it through Uipath Apps. Okay, Mohit, does it answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. And everyone have, yes?
Hey, Sandeep this side. I have one questions.
Hi, Sandeep.
Sure.
Hey, hi. My question is when we publish the UiPath app, is there any public URL to use anyone rather than organizations or the limited person to invite the mail? Is there any option to publish?
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me quickly share my screen and answer your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay. Let me know when my screen is visible.
Yeah.
Okay, so on your UiPath App Studio, once you publish your application, on these three dots, when you see, you can copy the URL. So this is the URL basically you can give to your users. Now, what kind of users can use it? So since, suppose you are part of an organization and you want all the organizational user to use it, you can simply give them this URL and add those users in the permission list. So how to add those users in the permission list is to go here and share and click the share option, and you can add the permissions over here. So this is how you actually share your application around. You can also limit the access. You can make them a user or you can make them a contributor to your application as well. So a contributor basically can run also and can change the code also for your application. So this is what can be done. So anyone outside of your organization definitely will not have the access to your orchestrator or to your app studio.
Just the other person just need to then run the process. Yeah, run the.
So somebody outside of your, like talking from an organizational preview, then that person has to be a part of that organizational structure. Or if you're creating this as like I created on my cloud server, then all you have to do is to invite that user to be a part of your tenant. So suppose if, let me add a user who's not a part of this particular, same, let me try with a user that's not a part. So in order to add that user, first you have to go to your admin panel. So suppose a new user you're adding, okay, you go to your admin panel, go to the users and groups and invite that user. So when you click on invite, you have to give the email ID of this person over here. Oh God, sorry, @gmail.com. And then you can assign them a membership. So currently, I'll just put as automation user. So automation user, and I'll invite. So once I click invite, what happens that this particular person gets an email in their inbox and they have to confirm that they have got that invite, and that's it. They can use your application.
Okay.
Yeah. So you basically have to go to your admin console, add the user in the users and groups, and then it's available.
Okay.
I hope that
yeah, got it. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Yeah, hey, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for all the good questions. And again, thank you very much for your participation. Have a good evening, good afternoon, and depends where you are. And look forward to another Uipath community meeting that me, Joveria, and other MVPs will be hosting soon. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Mohit.